Elena Dawson had always known how to mask pain behind elegance. As a child raised in the quieter suburbs of Connecticut by her widowed father, Captain Ronald Dawson, a retired firefighter who wore his trauma like soot on his skin, Elena learned early that survival often wore a smile. Her mother, Naomi, a violinist who passed from a sudden aneurysm when Elena was only 9, left behind journals filled with grace and unfinished dreams. Her father never remarried. Instead, he poured everything into raising Elena with structured kindness, moral firmness, and an unyielding sense of self-worth. Elena excelled in school, eventually earning a degree in educational psychology. She worked at a private school counseling emotionally troubled teenagers and often spent weekends volunteering at a community shelter. She didn't need to be saved. That was what made her fall for Liam Carrington so strange. Because from the very beginning, he seemed like someone who liked rescuing women, even ones who didn't ask to be rescued. Liam Carrington was charm carved into marble. The son of former investment banker Harold Carrington and socialite Genevieve Carrington, he grew up in a world where wealth wasn't earned, it was inherited like cheekbones. At 34, he had already become a rising star in the hedge fund world, known for his bold deals, high-risk stock flips, and ruthlessly effective poker face in boardrooms. The first time he laid eyes on Elena was at Nora Wallace's engagement party, a mutual friend from college. Elena was wearing a cobalt blue silk dress and talking about cognitive behavioral therapy with a few teachers from the Bronx. Liam had cut through the crowd like a man hunting down an answer to a question he didn't know he'd asked. Their first conversation lasted hours, the laughter flowing effortlessly, the chemistry undeniable. For Elena, his attention felt like sunlight. For Liam, her quiet resilience intrigued him like a locked door he had every intention of unlocking. Within 3 months, there was a proposal. 6 months later, Elena stood in a bridal boutique surrounded by ivory silk, gazing into a mirror where the dress fit, but somehow didn't feel like it belonged to her. The wedding was extravagant. Held at an estate in the Hamptons, it hosted nearly 400 guests, with imported orchids lining every table, a champagne waterfall, and a gospel choir flown in from Atlanta. But behind the glamour, Elena noticed things: Genevieve's polite but pointed remarks about her modest upbringing, Liam's controlling nature when he corrected the playlist she'd made, and how he whispered to his best man that Elena's too pure for this world, it's almost boring. That night, alone in the honeymoon suite while Liam was downstairs drinking with some groomsmen, Elena removed her makeup slowly and stared at herself in the mirror. She didn't cry, but something tightened in her chest. The room was beautiful, the marriage was official, and the future ahead looked like a movie script. But in her heart, a question had already formed like a crack in glass. Had she just walked into something she wouldn't be able to walk out of? The answer wouldn't come until much later, but that night was the first time Elena Dawson realized that even the most beautiful cages can shimmer like paradise, and a wedding dress that never fit right was never just a seamstress's error. The Carrington estate in Westchester County looked like something out of a royal catalog: manicured lawns, a circular marble driveway, ivy-laced balconies, and floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the clouds like glassy illusions. But once Elena stepped inside, it felt more like a mausoleum than a home. The staff greeted her with forced smiles, all of them seemingly more loyal to Liam than to her, and every corner of the house echoed his presence. She noticed how the walls had portraits of Liam's father but none of his childhood, how the rooms felt curated more than lived in, and how Liam insisted that she consult him before redecorating anything, even her own study. On the surface, Liam was warm, attentive, and generous with gifts, a necklace one day, designer shoes the next. But the gestures felt less like love and more like ownership. One evening, Elena requested they turn the guest room into a small art studio for her future counseling workshops. Liam's response was simple and chilling: "Why would you need that? You're not working anymore." The room remained a guest room, but Elena stopped speaking about her ideas after that. Silence was beginning to feel safer than sharing. It didn't take long before Elena met Genevieve Carrington again, this time not as the frosty mother of the groom, but as the reigning matriarch of the Carrington family fortune. Genevieve arrived at the estate unannounced, her presence announced only by the polished heels that clicked with confidence on the marble tiles. Her lips curled into a smile too practiced to be genuine. Elena, darling, I hope you're adjusting. This house can be intimidating for someone with simpler roots. The comment landed like a knife wrapped in silk. That day, over an overly formal brunch, Genevieve dissected Elena's background like a clinical report: her public school teaching job, her father's blue-collar profession, her lack of social pedigree. Liam remained mostly silent, occasionally chuckling in agreement or sipping his coffee with that unreadable smirk. Elena wanted to ask why he didn't defend her, but part of her already knew the answer. This wasn't just his family, it was his entire identity. She didn't belong in their world, and Genevieve intended to remind her of that every chance she got. That afternoon, Elena found herself wandering the house and realized something terrifying. Despite all the windows, the house had no view. It was all just reflections. Trapped light. Beautiful, empty illusion. By the third month of marriage, Elena could barely recognize herself. The woman who once laughed with friends over tea, who wrote in her journal every night and dreamed of starting a private therapy center for teens, had become someone who measured each word before speaking. Even the staff, though professional, watched her more than they spoke to her. There was Marion, the older housekeeper who used to greet her warmly but now barely met her eyes, and Paul, Liam's personal driver, who seemed to report her every outing. One evening, she overheard Genevieve's voice through Liam's office door, hissing, "Keep her in check before she embarrasses us." Elena didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, she took a long bath, allowing the water to blur the echoes in her head. That night, she lay beside Liam in bed, watching him scroll through market updates on his phone, and she realized something: this wasn't partnership, this was possession. It wasn't fear she felt, but the terrifying beginning of numbness. And somewhere in her gut, Elena knew, if she didn't find a way to reclaim herself, this house, this life, would consume her. But not yet. First, she had to observe. Then, she'd decide how to burn it all down, quietly. Elena's resignation came on a Thursday. The school principal, Mrs. Lenore Huxley, called her into her office wearing that familiar knitted frown. "Are you sure about this, Elena? You've made real change here. The kids. They trust you," she said. Elena smiled, but it was the hollow kind, the one she'd perfected in the mirror at home. "It's time," she answered softly, though everything inside her screamed otherwise. The truth was, she hadn't made the decision on her own. Liam had grown increasingly agitated with her work schedule, especially when she had late evening sessions or weekend activities with troubled teens. "Why are you prioritizing other people's kids over your husband?" he snapped one night when she missed a dinner at his firm's penthouse. The next morning, he left a notarized letter on the breakfast table, a drafted resignation she hadn't written, but was expected to sign. Her hands trembled as she did it. A part of her felt like she was betraying herself, abandoning the young girls who opened up to her in therapy. But Liam had been clear: his wife had no business working when she didn't need to. So she quit. Not out of will, but as the first documented surrender. The following week, Nora Wallace showed up uninvited, clutching a bottle of red wine and wearing her signature denim trench coat and combat boots. Nora had been Elena's best friend since university, their friendship a bond forged over late-night cramming sessions and heated debates on mental health policies. As soon as she walked through the door, Nora's eyes darted across the cold opulence of the Carrington home. "This place is like a museum where no one's allowed to touch anything," she muttered under her breath. They sat in the sunroom, though it offered little warmth. When Nora learned about Elena's resignation, her jaw clenched. "Liam asked you to quit?" "Elena, what the hell happened to the woman who said she'd open her own practice by 35? Elena didn't respond. Instead, she stared at her wineglass and whispered, "He just wants what's best." Nora wasn't fooled. No, he wants control, and he's dressing it up as love. Before she left, Nora slipped a folded document into Elena's hand, something she had been working on as a paralegal, a basic marital asset protection worksheet. "Don't wait till you're erased," she said. And then she was gone. That night, Elena hid the paper in a drawer she knew Liam never opened. Liam's gestures became increasingly performative. He scheduled photo shoots with upscale magazines for their philanthropic image, hosted black tie events where Elena was expected to stand silently by his side, and encouraged her to take etiquette classes with wealthy wives who talked more about purses than purpose. One night, during an elite couples retreat, a conversation around careers came up. When Elena was asked about her past work in therapy, Liam interjected before she could answer. She used to counsel kids, but now she's devoted to more valuable things, our home, our future family. The women smiled politely. The men nodded. And Elena? She felt her throat tighten with silent rage. That same evening, back in their suite, she told Liam she felt belittled. He laughed, brushed her hair back, and whispered, "I elevated you." Those words rang in her ears for hours. It became clear to her then, Liam didn't want a partner, he wanted a polished accessory. The illusion of love was held together by power disguised as protection, affection laced with possession. Elena wasn't sure yet how to fight back. But one thing was certain, she would never be that silent woman in the corner again. Not forever. 3 weeks after Elena's resignation, she decided to throw herself into something that still felt like hers, a charity initiative she had once dreamed of launching for underprivileged teen girls with behavioral struggles. Despite Liam's reluctance, she began planning a benefit gala meant to support mental health workshops. She used her personal savings, contacted a few colleagues from her teaching days, and drafted her own program template. For a few days, it felt like breathing fresh air again. She designed the invitations herself, reached out to caterers, and even arranged for a few girls she had mentored to give testimonials via recorded video. When she told Liam about the date, he blinked twice, then smiled with tight lips. "Of course, darling. Just don't make it about yourself too much, all right?" Elena paused, unsure how to respond. "It's not about me. It's about impact." Liam leaned in, kissed her cheek, and walked away muttering, "We'll see." That night, Elena stayed up finalizing logistics, unaware that behind the scenes, Liam had already contacted several guests, warning them that it was more of a feel-good vanity event and they weren't obligated to show up. He masked sabotage as caution. Elena's dream would soon become a stage of humiliation. The night of the event arrived, and Elena stood in the foyer of the rented ballroom in a sleek emerald gown, her eyes bright with hope. The room was elegantly lit, the tables adorned with wildflowers, and soft classical music played in the background. But as the hours ticked by, the seats remained largely empty. Only 12 people showed, half of them former colleagues from her teaching days, one being her old student Destiny who had taken the train across the city just to surprise her. The keynote speaker canceled last minute, citing an unexpected scheduling conflict. Elena's face froze and practiced grace as she realized what had happened. Liam arrived fashionably late, arm in arm with 2 of his corporate partners, feigning ignorance. "Oh, what a turnout," he said loudly as he grabbed a drink, then chuckled, adding under his breath, "I told you to manage expectations." His words were laced with venom disguised as charm. Elena didn't respond. She simply walked back to the podium, delivered a short but moving speech on resilience, and thanked those who did come. That night, she went home without saying a word to Liam. But inside her, something broke, and something else began to rise. That night in their bedroom, Elena sat on the edge of the bed, slowly removing her earrings in front of the mirror. Her reflection didn't look defeated, it looked focused. The more she thought about the people who ignored her invitation, the cancellations, and the dismissive eyes that followed her during the event, the clearer it became, this wasn't an accident. Liam hadn't just embarrassed her, he'd sabotaged her purpose. What kind of man feared his wife's success so much that he'd rather see her shrink than shine? As she stared at herself, a memory of her late mother flooded her mind. Naomi Dawson had once told her, "People will always underestimate a woman who doesn't roar. But it's the quiet ones they should fear." Elena stood, opened her laptop, and began documenting every text, email, and calendar change from the past 6 weeks. She wasn't ready to act yet, but she had started watching, storing, preparing. If Liam thought she was the helpless woman in the shadows, waiting for his validation to exist, he was tragically mistaken. This was the beginning of her awakening. And unlike the people who never showed to support her, she would show up for herself. Ruthlessly, if she had to. Liam's voice carried through the penthouse, slick and commanding, as he welcomed his financial partners and their wives into their Manhattan residence for the quarterly private dinner he insisted on hosting. Elena had barely received 24 hours' notice. She had no say in the guest list or menu, just a brief from Liam's secretary and a stylist sent by Genevieve earlier that morning. Her hair was done in a sleek chignon. Her dress, a crimson silk number with a plunging neckline, was something she never would have chosen herself. But she wore it because refusal would raise too many questions. As guests arrived, Elena played hostess with a practiced smile while inside she counted every second. The dining table seated 20, gold flatware shimmered under the chandelier. The aroma of duck confit and truffle risotto filled the air. Elena knew this wasn't about connection, it was about power. Liam didn't throw dinners to bond with anyone. He threw them to perform. Still, she sat beside him, offered small talk to strangers who barely acknowledged her, and laughed politely at jokes made at her expense. But nothing prepared her for the moment when Liam turned his fork toward her and said, "My wife wanted to be a therapist. Can you believe that?" The room erupted in laughter. One of the executives chuckled, "That explains your calm demeanor. You were probably analyzing all of us." Another added, "Well, good thing you settled into the real world. Those counseling degrees are just glorified babysitting." Elena blinked once. Twice. Her chest tightened. But her face did not betray her. She sipped her wine, steady-handed, even as her ears burned. Liam leaned back with a smug grin, clearly enjoying the spectacle. "Elena has this whole charity thing going, very noble, very underattended," he added, a direct jab at the failed gala. The wife smiled thinly. One even muttered, "So you're the quiet type. That's good. Men need peace at home." The conversation moved on, but Elena remained frozen in her seat, barely hearing anything after that. Something inside her shifted, not like a crack, but like a gear locking into place. She was done shrinking for his ego. She was done watching him decorate rooms with her silence. She would give him what he wanted tonight: smiles, grace, obedience. But in the morning, she would begin what she later called her private rebellion, one composed not of yelling, but of gathering evidence. Witnesses. Leverage. After dessert, Liam guided guests toward the lounge for cigars and digestives while Elena excused herself to the hallway bathroom. Inside, she locked the door and leaned against the marble wall, her chest rising and falling. She pulled out her phone and opened the voice memo app. Quietly, she began recording her thoughts, details of the night, the guests, Liam's words. It wasn't about proof just yet. It was about building a trail. A timeline. A defense against a storm she knew was coming. When she emerged 10 minutes later, no one noticed her absence. She slipped back into the room like nothing had happened. Liam greeted her with a kiss on the cheek, the same hand that had earlier used her dignity as entertainment. She smiled back. But her eyes didn't. That night, as Liam slept soundly beside her, she transferred the audio recording to a secure cloud folder and labeled it "Dinner Party of Shame Witness Entry 001. It was the first file in a digital archive she never wanted to create, but now knew she had to. Not for revenge. Not yet. But for survival. Because the only thing more dangerous than a woman humiliated is a woman who remembers everything. Nora returned unexpectedly one Tuesday morning with an expression Elena couldn't read, somewhere between concern and calculated urgency. She hadn't texted, hadn't called. She simply rang the Carrington Estates bell with a manila envelope clutched tight to her chest and eyes scanning the property like someone arriving behind enemy lines. Elena ushered her into the solarium, where the scent of jasmine and pine barely masked the tension crackling in the air. Nora leaned forward, voice low. "I need you to look at something," she said, handing over the envelope. Inside were photocopies of property transfer documents, deeds, and asset titles, all linked to Liam. He's moving things out of his name into shell companies. Ones that make it near impossible to trace. And your name's not on a single one of them. Elena's fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages. Real estate in Palm Springs, an account in the Cayman Islands, business holdings under Carrington LLC variants. Why would he do this? She whispered. Nora didn't blink. Because when he discards you, and he will, he'll make sure you leave with nothing. The words sank like iron into Elena's chest. She hadn't cried yet. But now her hands folded in her lap like someone mourning the living. Later that evening, Genevieve Carrington arrived unannounced, again. She entered through the front without knocking, as though the house were her inheritance and Elena merely a temporary occupant. She wore her usual pearls, blazer pressed crisp like it had never met a wrinkle, and her smile, weaponized with elegance, could freeze fire. Liam tells me you've been snooping into family business, she began, gently swirling her tea. Elena said nothing. I understand curiosity, darling, but the Carringtons are a different breed. We keep things in order. Controlled. She paused, then set the cup down with a clink. You may not realize it, but you're protected. My son has done you a favor, elevated you. All this, she gestured around, was not meant for someone who comes from modest means. It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. Elena felt her spine straighten. Genevieve rose and leaned in, her voice turning quiet and venomous. Don't confuse survival with entitlement. Know your lane, or you'll lose more than your name. That night, Elena stared at the guest bedroom where her mother-in-law once stayed and made a quiet promise to herself, next time Genevieve visits, she'll need permission to enter. Not out of courtesy, but because nothing in this house would belong to them anymore. That night, Elena stood in the study and began going through Liam's personal desk drawer, something she had never dared to touch. Behind locked compartments, she found backup ledgers, duplicate SIM cards, a flash drive labeled Chambers, and a signed prenup she had never actually seen before, one she hadn't signed. Her heart hammered as she examined the signature. It was hers. But it wasn't hers. The loops were wrong. The E didn't curl the way she always curled it. It was forged. Cold, calculated, and filed away like a relic of conquest. Panic fought with fury in her veins. She snapped photos of everything, uploading them to a hidden encrypted folder she had created with Nora's help. She was building her case, yes, but more than that, she was peeling away the layers of the man she had married. Liam wasn't just controlling. He was planning something. Something ruthless. And if she didn't get ahead of it, she'd be the one left gasping for breath in a world where no one would believe her. Elena closed the drawer slowly, her pulse steady now. The prey had stopped running. The predator had been marked. The war would be long, but she would not lose. She would learn his every step, and beat him at his own game. The missed period came like a whisper at first, easy to ignore, explain away. Elena had been under stress, skipping meals, and hadn't had a full night's rest in weeks. But as her body began sending unfamiliar signals, waves of nausea, sudden fatigue, and the strange soreness that pulsed through her back, she knew it wasn't something she could brush off. She didn't tell Liam. Not yet. She made the appointment at a private women's clinic across town under her maiden name, Dawson. It was a cloudy Thursday, and she wore sunglasses and a gray hoodie as if she were someone hiding from the world. The clinic was warm and welcoming, the receptionist gentle, the walls painted in soft, calming colors. Elena sat in the waiting room surrounded by women she didn't know, some visibly anxious, others flipping through outdated magazines with the kind of dead-eyed focus only fear could breed. When her name was called, Ms. Dawson, she followed the nurse in without a word. The ultrasound confirmed what her heart already suspected, she was pregnant. 7 weeks. Her hands shook as she held the printout, but her mind was already racing, not with joy, not even fear, but strategy. She wasn't sure what scared her more, the pregnancy, or telling Liam. She waited until Saturday morning. Liam was reading a market report in bed, a glass of green juice on the nightstand, while jazz played softly from the Bluetooth speakers. Elena sat beside him, her fingers laced tightly. I have something to tell you, she began, voice steady. He glanced up. I'm pregnant. The silence that followed wasn't shock, it was something colder, heavier. Liam blinked, then slowly set the tablet down. And what exactly do you expect me to do with that information? He asked, no trace of warmth in his voice. Elena blinked. I thought you'd want to know. Liam exhaled, ran his hand through his hair, and muttered, You really think now is a good time for this? We're in the middle of a capital reallocation, Elena. The word slammed into her like a punch. I didn't get pregnant on my own. He looked at her, sharp and unmoved. Maybe you should have thought of that before letting it happen. There was no embrace, no discussion of the future, just dismissal. That night, Elena slept in the guest room for the first time, cradling her stomach in the dark, a single thought consuming her, my child will not grow up under his shadow. I'll protect us both. No matter what it takes. The following week, Elena returned to the clinic for follow-up blood work, this time more composed. That's where she met Dr. Ruben Cho, the on-call physician with gentle eyes and a calm presence. He wasn't intrusive, didn't ask about the father. But as he spoke to her about nutritional needs and emotional balance during early pregnancy, she found herself blinking back tears. She hadn't realized how starved she'd become for simple kindness. Dr. Cho handed her a list of prenatal therapists and recommended someone named Lana Feingold, a licensed counselor known for working with women in controlling or high-pressure environments. You don't need to be broken to need help, he said gently. That line stayed with her. Elena thanked him, then walked back to her car slowly, the city buzzing around her but feeling so far away. In her inbox later that evening was an email from Nora, subject line, Asset Movement Update Urgent. The body of the email had screenshots of Liam's newest LLC registrations, this time connected to a startup in Dubai. Elena closed her laptop with shaking hands and pressed a palm to her belly. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about legacy. And she was ready to fight for hers, quietly, smartly, and with every weapon her husband didn't know she had. The lake house had once belonged to Liam's grandfather, a sleek, modern estate nestled along the shores of Lake Minnewaska in upstate New York. It was the kind of property rarely visited but kept immaculately furnished with cold granite countertops and minimalist art. When Liam suggested they spend the weekend there to reconnect, Elena hesitated. She wasn't sure what version of her husband would show up, the affectionate charmer or the manipulative strategist. But for the sake of the baby growing inside her, and to buy herself time, she agreed. The drive was quiet, with Liam talking mostly about stocks and international markets, his tone clipped and impersonal. Upon arrival, Elena noticed he had brought no books, no wine, no comfort essentials, just his tablet, charger, and a black folder labeled Amendments. That night over dinner, Liam offered her grilled salmon and sparkling water, then casually brought up household efficiency. Since you're not working, and you'll soon be home full-time, he began, pulling out a set of papers, I made some updates to the marital agreement. Just some standard clauses. Elena froze. Her heart pounded. The top sheet bore her name. And a signature line she had never consented to. The pages outlined new inheritance protections, clauses tying her financial access to behavioral discretion, and revisions to their prenuptial agreement. Only this version included a signed date from nearly 2 years ago. Elena knew immediately what it was. A forged document. A carefully constructed trap. I never signed this, she said, her voice steady but burning. Liam didn't flinch. You did, he said, pouring himself whiskey. Or maybe you just don't remember. Stress does that to people. She stared at him, stunned by how easily the lie rolled off his tongue, how calm he was. If you're going to trap me, at least don't insult my intelligence, she said. Liam leaned forward, expression unreadable. I'm not trapping you, Elena. I'm protecting what's mine. And this child changes everything. We need clarity. She didn't speak for the rest of the night. Instead, when he went to bed, Elena slipped into the study and took photos of every page. She uploaded them to her secure cloud drive and scheduled a meeting with Nora for the next week. Liam thought he was sealing her fate. But what he didn't know was she had begun unraveling his entire empire, one thread at a time. The morning after, while Liam went out for a boat ride, a surprise knock came at the door. Standing there, looking equally surprised to see Elena, was Marcus Langston, Liam's estranged college roommate and business rival. He held a bottle of champagne and a small bag. "Tessa said you two were here this weekend," he said. "Did I get the dates wrong?" Elena forced a smile, mind racing. Marcus was taller than Liam, with sharp green eyes and a laid-back charm that masked dangerous intelligence. He had been kind to Elena during the early days of her marriage, but Liam had cut off the friendship abruptly, accusing Marcus of jealous meddling. Now, Marcus's presence sent Liam into a tailspin. Upon returning, Liam's smile faltered when he saw him. "Didn't expect guests," Liam said flatly. Marcus grinned. "Just in the area. Thought I'd drop in." Tension sizzled like an open wire. Over lunch, subtle jabs turned into verbal fencing. Marcus brought up business ethics. Elena noticed Liam grip his glass tighter. Tessa's name surfaced too, Marcus's design partner, but something in his tone hinted at deeper ties. Elena listened carefully. Liam was agitated. Off balance. And in that moment, she realized Marcus was her wild card. And wild cards, when played right, could break kings. The storm arrived unannounced, its winds howling across the Carrington estate like a long-forgotten reckoning. By nightfall, thunder growled low and restless while rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Elena sat curled in the armchair of the upstairs library, flipping through a psychology casebook she hadn't touched since her last day at the school. She didn't bother asking Liam if he wanted dinner. He was downstairs in his study, immersed in stocks and documents. But when the power suddenly flickered and went out completely, a suffocating silence blanketed the mansion. Liam cursed downstairs, his voice bouncing angrily through the marble corridors. Elena calmly stood and retrieved the emergency flashlight from the linen closet. She walked downstairs to find him yanking cords and shouting into his dead phone. "What the hell happened to the generator?" he snapped. "Maybe it decided it needed behavioral clarity," she replied coolly. He turned sharply. "What did you just say?" Elena didn't answer. Instead, she lit candles one by one, her expression unreadable. The estate, usually sterile and bright, now flickered with moody shadows, an atmosphere more honest than any Liam had ever designed. The darkness wasn't frightening to Elena. It was freeing. Later that night, as the storm raged outside, a sharp argument erupted in the master bedroom. Liam accused Elena of being ungrateful, of sabotaging the mood of the house and using pregnancy as a sympathy weapon. He had a talent for making venom sound rational, cold rage dressed in silk words. Elena stood her ground, arms crossed over her belly. "You don't get to use this house, this power, and erase me in the process," she said firmly. "I see what you're doing. You're trying to trap me in ink and documents like I'm a liability. But I've been watching you too, Liam. And the more I see, the more I realize you're not powerful. You're just a man with too much to hide." The slap didn't land on her face, it landed on her phone. Liam had lunged for it when he saw her recording, shattering it against the floor. Glass scattered. Elena didn't flinch. She looked at the broken screen, then at him. "You're scared," she whispered. "And that's why you break things." Liam's breath was ragged, eyes wild. But she didn't raise her voice. She turned and walked into the guest room, barefoot across the shattered pieces, every step forward more fearless than the last. Once inside the guest room, Elena locked the door and pulled out her encrypted backup phone, an identical model with dual storage, one Liam didn't know existed. She connected it to the Wi-Fi signal tethered to her smartwatch, something Liam had always mocked as trendy garbage. Within minutes, she uploaded the entire folder of scanned documents, voice memos, prenup photos, and audio clips to a hidden drive with 3 firewalls. She also began reaching out, first to Sabrina Lim, a former student who now ran a women-led media consultancy, then to Adrian Pike, a journalist she'd once helped during a school scandal years back. "Nothing formal yet," Elena typed. But I may need eyes on a story that involves a high-profile investor. Let me know if you're open." Before lying down, she recorded another memo and titled it Storm Night, Witness Entry 006. The thunder outside felt like punctuation, a cosmic applause for each quiet move she made. As she finally drifted to sleep, her hands wrapped protectively around her belly, she whispered aloud, "You won't grow up fearing anyone. Not even your father." For the first time in weeks, Elena slept through the night, even as the wind screamed like warning drums against the windows. The morning after the storm, sunlight trickled through the tall windows as though it didn't know the damage that had been done inside. Elena stepped out of the guest room quietly, half expecting to find Liam already at the breakfast table, sipping espresso and pretending everything was normal. Instead, she found the kitchen empty, his car gone from the driveway. A note sat on the counter, "Business meeting. Don't wait up." No apology. No acknowledgement of the shattered phone, the words exchanged, or the fear he tried to instill. She picked up a broom and dustpan and swept the shards he had left behind, each piece like a metaphor for the marriage she once believed could be healed. By noon, she had packed a duffel bag with essential documents, vitamins, flash drives, a burner phone, and cash Nora had advised her to keep months ago. But what she wasn't prepared for was the email she received from the private bank she hadn't accessed since the wedding, a cold notification, "Account closed. Funds transferred." The message was followed by a single, automated PDF. It confirmed the transfer of all remaining balances, once gifts from her late father, into a trust labeled Genevieve Holding Corp. Her body went still. It had begun. Elena drove straight to Nora's apartment in Midtown, nearly breaking down when her friend opened the door. "He drained me, Nora," she said as she stepped inside, her voice hollow. "He took my father's legacy. He didn't just control my life, he erased my past." Nora wasted no time. She grabbed her laptop, began cross-referencing account logs, and confirmed it. Liam had executed a silent transfer authorized by a power of attorney Elena didn't recall signing. "That's because you didn't," Nora snapped. "It's forged. Same way he tried to trap you with that prenup." As they strategized legal responses and encryption protocols, Nora pulled out a flash drive of her own. "I found something in the Carrington Holdings archive, an old investment contract with your forged signature tied to a mining project in Brazil. If that project violates environmental law, he's liable. You wouldn't be." Elena took the drive, her fingers trembling not with fear, but with awakening. "He's not just abusive, Nora. He's criminal." They both knew the next steps would be delicate. Exposure too soon would allow Liam to vanish, erase trails. But they also knew Elena couldn't live one more day without reclaiming control. "Then we strike when he least expects it," Elena whispered. "No warning. No mercy." That evening, back at the Carrington estate, Liam returned to a house quieter than usual. Elena was in the master bedroom, packing a small overnight bag with deliberate slowness. When he entered, she turned toward him with a neutrality that unsettled him more than fury ever could. "I know what you did," she said. Liam scoffed. "You'll have to be more specific." Without blinking, Elena pulled out a printed document, one of the signatures he had forged. "You left a digital trail. You always do." His smirk faltered. "You think you can trap me with this?" he barked. He moved toward her aggressively, knocking the printed paper from her hands and slamming his fist into the mirror behind her. Glass shattered and rained onto the vanity. His hand was bleeding, but he didn't care. "This is my house. My life. You don't win here, Elena." She stared at the broken mirror, shards catching the light like 1,000 truths. Then, she calmly retrieved her overnight bag and walked to the door. "You're right, Liam," she said as she paused. "This was your house. But I stopped playing by your rules the moment you mistook my silence for surrender." Then she walked out, leaving behind the man who had just broken his last illusion. The Carrington Foundation's annual Autumn Gala was one of the most talked about events on the East Coast social calendar, a fusion of vanity, networking, and ostentatious displays of wealth cloaked beneath the banner of charity. Liam insisted Elena attend, despite their fractured state, branding her absence as a PR liability. Elena agreed, quietly. But not for the reasons Liam thought. She wore a floor-length black gown, her baby bump just barely noticeable beneath the satin, and stepped onto the red carpet like a ghost returned to haunt the living. Cameras flashed, microphones reached toward Liam for his sound bites, but all eyes shifted when Nora Wallace appeared beside Elena, stunning in a navy ensemble and unapologetically confident. Nora's presence wasn't just personal, it was strategic. Within the gala's walls, where champagne flowed and whispered deals took shape, Nora handed out subtle nods to specific guests, executives, legal aides, and former associates, all people she had previously contacted. They weren't just partygoers. They were witnesses in waiting. At the center of it all, Liam basked under the lights, convinced he still owned the narrative. He couldn't see the cracks forming beneath his feet. He didn't know the gala would be his last performance as a man untouchable. It was halfway through the evening, during a brief intermission between speeches, that Elena took the stage under the guise of introducing a youth scholarship initiative. The ballroom dimmed slightly, a spotlight cast onto her as she adjusted the microphone. Her voice was calm, unwavering. Before we announce the recipients, I want to say something, not as a hostess or a Carrington, but as a woman who has quietly observed. She paused, then clicked the remote in her hand. On the screen behind her, a slideshow began, not of scholarship winners, but audio waveforms and snippets of voice memos. Liam's voice played first, dismissive, controlling. Then, a clip of him instructing an assistant to backdate Elena's signature. The room froze. Gasps, whispered confusion, shifting bodies. And finally, a message from Genevieve Carrington, recorded from one of Elena's encrypted backups. She'll be nothing but a pretty liability. Get rid of her before she asks for more than she deserves. Liam lunged toward the stage, but Marcus Langston stepped in his path, shaking his head. Let her speak, Liam. You've had the floor long enough. The curtain of perception had been pulled back. The ballroom was no longer his kingdom. It was a court, and Liam was suddenly on trial. Afterward, Elena didn't wait for applause or confrontation. She exited the stage, bypassed the gasping crowd, and walked straight into the garden terrace where Nora and Marcus joined her. You detonated a nuclear bomb, Marcus whispered, his voice half awed, half concerned. Good, Elena replied, without a flicker of regret. Back inside, Liam's phone buzzed nonstop, messages from board members, lawyers, financial partners, each distancing themselves with sudden precision. He stood alone, jaw clenched, his empire unraveling in real time, and for the first time, he looked small. Vulnerable. Naked. Meanwhile, a statement was released online through Nora's contact at the press, a formal apology from Elena for past silence, along with digital evidence now in the hands of investigators. But what no one knew, not even Nora, was that Marcus had handed Elena something earlier that night, a sealed folder marked Project Halberd. Inside were documents that tied Liam not only to financial fraud, but international laundering through a shell firm registered in Belize. Elena hadn't decided when or if she'd use it yet. But just knowing it existed made her next breath lighter. The mask had fallen. And beneath it wasn't a monster, it was a scared little boy pretending to be powerful. That truth would be his undoing. Elena didn't expect the woman at the cafe to be so poised. Liliana Briggs had once been nothing more than a name, whispered among Carrington elites as the ghost from Liam's past, an ex-fiancé who disappeared shortly before their engagement made headlines. But when Marcus contacted Elena with a quiet warning, "You'll want to meet the woman who saw him before you did," Elena didn't hesitate. Liliana arrived at the cafe in dark slacks, a cream coat, and eyes that looked like they had survived fire and come back colder. They spoke in low voices over chamomile tea. "He ruined me," Liliana began, sliding a thumb drive across the table. "I had a software firm. He promised funding, tied his name to it, then pulled out the night before launch. Filed lawsuits, blamed mismanagement, froze the accounts. I lost everything." Elena blinked. "And then?" Liliana shrugged. "Then he paid me to leave. Signed an NDA, moved me to Florence, paid the rent for 2 years, but only if I kept silent. She sipped her tea. But I'm done being silent. I heard about what you did at the gala. It's your turn now. But you won't do this alone. And just like that, Elena had an unexpected sister in arms. Later that evening, Elena hosted a quiet meeting at Nora's apartment, where 4 women sat around a dinner table that had seen far more war plans than meals lately. Nora, Liliana, and Tessa Bloom, Marcus's partner and an acclaimed interior designer who'd once had a brief and bitter run-in with Liam during a disputed contract, shared files, timelines, and strategies. Each woman had been wounded in different ways, but all bore the scars of Liam's manipulative empire. He isolates, discredits, and disposes, Tessa said plainly, pushing a binder toward Elena. This is the design portfolio I submitted to his firm 4 years ago. He rejected it, then sold a copy of it to one of his overseas clients. You'll find his assistant's metadata buried in the file structure. Elena skimmed through the pages, stunned. He's not just cruel, she said quietly. He's a thief. Nora leaned forward. And he's surrounded by loyalists who've kept him protected for years. But they won't survive sunlight. They dubbed themselves the Sisterhood, not officially, not out loud, but that night they made a pact. Each one would gather evidence independently and in silence. When the time came, their collective truth would be louder than any lie Liam had ever told. By midnight, a strategy was mapped out, one that went beyond courtrooms or headlines. The women would use their respective industries, media, design, law, and technology, to systematically expose Liam's web of deceit. Tessa would contact her silent investors, many of whom had crossed paths with Carrington Holdings and were unaware of their names being used without consent. Nora would draft the legal framework, compiling documents that would point to systemic fraud, not just isolated incidents. Liliana would contact foreign associates, tracing offshore connections, especially the ones that tied back to Project Halberd. Elena, meanwhile, would remain public-facing. She would play the composed wife until it was time to file official charges. But most importantly, she would be the glue, keeping them focused, measured, and brave. Before they parted ways that night, Liliana stood and held up her tea. To the women who won't be erased, she said. The others raised their cups. Elena looked around the room, her heart no longer racing with fear but pulsing with purpose. Liam had spent years building a kingdom of mirrors and shadows. But he had forgotten one truth: even the most cunning predator underestimates the strength of prey that learns to fight in a pack. And this time, the hunt was coming for him. Elena had never pretended to be anyone other than herself, until now. With Liliana's contacts and Nora's encryption tools, she created a digital identity under the alias Aria Monroe, a fictitious investment analyst specializing in crypto acquisitions. Under this new persona, she carefully infiltrated an online forum where Liam's latest mistress, Marissa Dorn, frequently posted anonymously, mostly sharing shallow lifestyle updates, occasionally flaunting untraceable gifts from a mysterious partner. Through these posts, Elena identified the offshore funneling pattern. Each time Marissa traveled to Monaco or Singapore, shortly afterward, ghost LLCs under Liam's holding company would appear, transfer funds, and dissolve within weeks. What disturbed Elena most wasn't just the money, but the way Marissa had been weaponized. She wasn't just Liam's mistress, she was a decoy, unknowingly being used to shift capital away from legal scrutiny. Elena began a private conversation with her, acting as a curious analyst with interest in Liam's brilliance. Marissa, flattered and eager to flaunt her insider status, revealed screenshots and account references, unknowing proof that would later become exhibits in court. It wasn't revenge. It was intelligence gathering. And Elena executed it like a masterclass in controlled rage. She wasn't just fighting for her freedom now, she was preparing to bury the Carrington name in truth. At the same time, Tessa began working her way through real estate contracts tied to Liam's shell accounts. In one particularly twisted deal, she discovered a Miami beachfront property purchased under a fake name, Alonzo Benton, which had Liam's fingerprints all over it. The deed had been signed by an alleged Venezuelan entrepreneur who, upon investigation, turned out to be a deceased fisherman with no international records. Nora contacted a former Department of Justice paralegal who owed her a favor and sent the materials over for review. What came back was damning. The identity fraud crossed into federal territory, and if proven in court, could carry serious prison time. Meanwhile, Liliana coordinated with a European data forensics expert who traced Liam's hidden holdings back to a chain of art laundering fronts. He used fake appraisals to claim inflated losses and write-offs, Liliana explained. It's not just financial abuse anymore, it's tax fraud, international laundering, and civil racketeering. Elena listened in silence, her baby growing steadily inside her. She was no longer the woman asking why this happened. She was the woman mapping how it would end. And she would ensure every document, lie, and betrayal was exposed, not with rage, but with undeniable evidence and deliberate timing. Every night Elena continued to record private memos under aliases and file them into categorized folders: marital abuse, financial fraud, coercion, emotional manipulation, asset theft, and now, international crimes. She kept the burner phone charged, the encrypted drives updated, and a second set of files stored in a weatherproof box at a secure P.O. box locker in Harlem under her cousin's name. But it was during a call with Marcus that she received the final key. There's one more account. Buried under a shell within a shell. I've only seen Liam access it once, back when we were partners, he said. He provided coordinates, an abandoned business name, and a Swiss node registered through the dark web. With Sabrina Lim's help from the media firm, Elena accessed it through legal gray zones. Inside, she discovered the shocking truth: Liam had forged additional prenups. Not just for her, but for at least 2 other women, contracts he kept as legal traps for blackmail leverage. She stared at the screen, nauseated, a hand on her stomach. He's not just dangerous, he's methodical. And now, thanks to every lie he'd ever documented, she had more than enough to become the architect of his downfall. Slowly. Strategically. Completely. The annual Global Investment Consortium held its luxury summit that year on the private island of Varelli, a playground for billionaires nestled in the Mediterranean, far from regulation, paparazzi, or government eyes. Liam had been invited as a keynote speaker on financial fluidity in emerging markets, and it was the perfect storm. Elena, through Marcus's discreet back channel, ensured Liam would be presented with a game-changing partnership opportunity, one that came from a fabricated Middle Eastern venture group created entirely by Liliana's contacts and masked under encrypted credentials. The bait, a $200 million offshore renewable energy deal. Liam, arrogant and greedy as ever, jumped at the opportunity. He didn't know that the contract had been drafted by Nora, reviewed by federal compliance experts, and embedded with subtle legal traps. Once signed, it would prove that Liam had knowingly entered into an illegal international agreement under fraudulent pretenses, thereby nullifying any protection his shell companies could offer. As he boarded the jet, Elena packed a suitcase, not with clothes, but with final evidence drives, notarized declarations, and sealed affidavits. Liam thought he was flying toward expansion. In truth, he was flying directly into a cage, with gold trim and a velvet landing strip. Back in New York, the Carrington estate had been left in Genevieve's care while Liam was away. For years, she ruled over the household like a general in pearls, ordering staff around, overseeing contracts, and coordinating Liam's image management with PR agencies. But when federal agents arrived at the gates with subpoenas in hand, authorized via emergency motions backed by Elena's evidence, Genevieve was blindsided. "This is preposterous," she hissed at the agents as they served her notice, froze the estate's assets, and began cataloging every piece of financial paper, server drive, and hard-copy ledger. Inside a locked cabinet in Liam's private office, agents uncovered documents implicating not just Liam, but Genevieve herself, in helping him funnel funds and forge tax losses under the name of a fake charity foundation. Her confident veneer cracked. Nora watched it unfold from a nearby parked SUV, feeding live updates to Elena. Meanwhile, Sabrina Lim's team quietly released an exposé under the title, Empire of Illusion, How Liam Carrington Sold America a Lie. The article featured redacted excerpts from Elena's recordings and the timeline of abuse. The response was nuclear. Sponsors began pulling out of Liam's businesses. Investors froze portfolios. Elena didn't have to shout. The facts screamed on her behalf. Liam was mid-presentation in a luxurious marble conference hall when the alert buzzed through his encrypted device, accounts frozen. Federal inquiry initiated. NYSE statement pending. Press leak imminent. His voice caught in his throat, and for a split second, the crowd noticed. He wrapped up hastily, declining post-panel interviews and ducking into his suite, where Marcus awaited him. "You knew," Liam growled. Marcus smiled thinly. "I warned you, years ago. But your ego made it impossible to listen." Liam threw a glass against the wall. "Is this you, Elena?" Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he handed him a sealed envelope, Elena's handwriting across the front. Inside was a single photo, Liam standing next to Marissa, timestamped at a private bank in Geneva. Attached was a note, "You always thought I was your prey. You were just fattening yourself for the kill." Liam's hands trembled. Outside, the sea crashed calmly against the island. He was stranded, physically and financially. For the first time, there was no backup, no one to buy, no lie left unspent. And far away, in a small apartment overlooking the Hudson River, Elena sat on a window bench, a soft breeze brushing her cheek. She didn't smile. She simply whispered, "Checkmate." The moment Elena Carrington's name appeared atop the federal court's online docket, the financial world froze. Elena Dawson Carrington versus Liam Carrington wasn't just another high-profile divorce. It was a class-action lawsuit tied to criminal allegations, racketeering violations, identity forgery, and international laundering, all with meticulously archived exhibits. Nora's legal team filed a 400-page motion, citing not only personal abuse and psychological manipulation, but full-scale corporate misconduct. Liam's name was now under active investigation by the U.S. Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission. Within hours of the lawsuit being unsealed, Carrington Holdings stock plummeted. By the next morning, 3 board members had resigned. Elena didn't attend the courthouse through the front entrance. She arrived through a side security door, shielded not by fear but by strategy. Nora walked beside her. Marcus and Liliana trailed a few feet behind. Elena wore no makeup, no jewelry, only a gray blazer, a white blouse, and the calmness of a woman who had already endured her war long before anyone witnessed it. "You're ready?" Nora asked. Elena nodded. "He's the one who should be scared now." In court, Liam sat alone. Genevieve had vanished, Marissa had fled, and every legal shield he once trusted had crumbled like paper in rain. Inside the courtroom, Elena's side delivered opening arguments not just with emotion, but with hard, surgical facts. Audio recordings, notarized witness statements, paper trails across 8 countries, financial analysis from 3 different forensic accountants, and footage from foreign surveillance all formed a story so detailed, so undeniable, the judge frequently paused proceedings just to allow cross-verification. Liam's attorney, a sharp-tongued man named Powell Riggs, struggled to rebut even one timeline without collapsing under the weight of the documentation. And then came the turning point. Nora played the voice recording of Liam mocking Elena's intelligence at the Autumn Gala, followed by the falsified prenup contracts revealed under handwriting analysis and metadata timestamps. The gallery gasped. One juror covered her mouth. Liam's shoulders stiffened, his jaw locking in fury. Elena sat unmoved, her eyes fixed on nothing and everything at once. When asked to testify, she didn't offer a breakdown or tears. Instead, she told her story like a psychologist breaking down a profile. Calm, precise, powerful. She spoke about coercion, humiliation, financial erasure, and the danger of polished men who wear their egos like armor. "He didn't just want to break me," she said. "He wanted me to thank him for it." The court heard her. And they believed her. By the end of the 3rd day, media coverage had transformed Elena from the quiet Carrington wife to a national symbol of strategic resilience. News anchors debated her brilliance. Women's advocacy groups rallied behind her. Hashtags like hashtag she brought him down and hashtag Elena Unbroken trended worldwide. But she stayed out of the spotlight, giving no interviews. When journalists camped outside her building, she responded once through Nora's firm, "The story is not about power. It's about accountability." Behind closed doors, Elena finalized the next blow, filing a second lawsuit in conjunction with Marcus and Tessa, targeting Carrington Holdings' use of falsified client endorsements and illegal design plagiarism. Liam was hit with injunctions, asset freezes, and civil penalties amounting to tens of millions. He tried to countersue for defamation, but his motion was laughed out of court. The final blow came when Liliana handed over a sealed letter, one from a foreign ambassador detailing Liam's coercion of overseas partners under falsified documentation. The U.S. Attorney's Office officially stepped in. Elena declined to watch the press conference. She was already at home, curled on the couch, her hand resting on her belly as her baby kicked softly. The fight had never been about destroying Liam. It had always been about reclaiming herself. And now, she had. The eviction notice arrived on embossed legal stationery, delivered by a federal marshal who walked through the Carrington estate like a man visiting a crime scene. Liam stood at the foyer in stunned silence, the marble floor beneath him suddenly feeling unstable. "You have 72 hours to vacate," the officer announced. The mansion, once his symbol of status and wealth, was now listed as a frozen asset, pending full seizure under a federal investigation. His voice broke as he tried to negotiate. "There's a mistake. My attorneys," but the marshal cut him off, calmly stating, "Everything has been verified. The house is no longer yours." Genevieve's antique collections were catalogued. The fleet of luxury vehicles towed. Every drawer, closet, and safe was opened under supervision. And with each click of a camera and zip of a plastic evidence bag, Liam's legacy crumbled. Meanwhile, the media watched from the road beyond the gates, cameras flashing, reporters live-streaming his fall from grace. Inside, he sat on the bare staircase with his head in his hands, the echo of his own silence haunting him louder than any judgment. Once a king in his castle, now a man with no throne, and worse, no audience left to applaud him. Marissa Dorn had vanished days earlier, taking with her 2 duffel bags of stolen cash and several pieces of jewelry Liam had gifted her under fake names. She left behind a voicemail, one that Liam would replay in disbelief. "You told me I'd be safe. You lied. I'm not going down with you." Her betrayal was brutal, but fitting. The woman he used as a pawn had fled the game when she realized he wasn't a king but a collapsing piece on the board. Tessa's contacts confirmed she was last seen boarding a private jet under an alias connected to one of Liam's old shell firms. That trail, too, was being investigated. Meanwhile, former investors in Carrington Holdings publicly denounced him, many threatening to sue for damages. Once adoring interns were sharing NDA-breaking exposés online. The media painted him as both villain and cautionary tale. Even old friends refused to take his calls. Liam tried to find comfort in the small things, his tailored suits, his untouched vintage scotch, but none of it tasted like power anymore. It tasted like loss. For the first time in his life, he had no idea what came next. And that terrified him more than Elena's lawsuit ever did. Far away from the cameras and chaos, Elena had moved into a lakeside apartment just outside the city. It wasn't grand or opulent, but it was quiet, filled with morning light and warm wood tones. A small garden out back allowed her to plant tomatoes and lavender, tiny symbols of a life she was building from soil and healing, not stone and pride. Nora visited often, bringing groceries and updates on the legal progress. Liliana occasionally stayed overnight, the 2 women sharing long, reflective conversations about the illusion of love and the cost of silence. Elena had declined all media offers, sponsorship deals, or book proposals. "I don't want to capitalize on my pain," she told Nora. "I just want peace." She spent her days journaling, reading, and preparing for motherhood. Some nights she played back the recordings, not out of vengeance, but as reminders of how far she had come. The house Liam tried to trap her in was gone. The life he tried to design for her had burned. And from the ashes, she was building something real. Not to prove anything to the world, but to prove it to herself. She had not just survived. She had prevailed, unbroken. The media frenzy around Liam Carrington had finally begun to die down, at least on the surface. With court proceedings in motion, frozen assets, and a ruined reputation, Liam attempted to salvage what little public dignity he had left. He began crafting a redemption narrative, scheduling quiet interviews with obscure financial podcasts and low-level publications. "Everyone makes mistakes," he said in one clip. "But I've learned. I'm focused on recovery and growth." To the uninformed public, it seemed like he was trying to rebuild. But Elena watched in silence from her small living room, remote in hand, lips pressed into a thin line. She hadn't responded to any of his indirect statements. She hadn't addressed his apologies through PR firms or his subtle attempts to paint himself as misguided but misunderstood. But she had one more truth to share, one he would never see coming. She selected a file from her encrypted cloud, an audio recording made in secret, nearly a year ago. Genevieve Carrington's voice, sharp and biting, poured through the speakers. "Elena is nothing more than a breeding vessel. Once she gives us a Carrington heir, she's disposable. Liam, you know this. You said it yourself." It was time the world heard what she had heard. Elena sent the audio, unedited, raw, and timestamped, to Sabrina Lim's team. Within 24 hours, it was embedded inside an investigative exposé titled The Carrington Doctrine, Behind Closed Doors. The article pulled no punches. It outlined the emotional manipulation, psychological gaslighting, and legacy-driven misogyny that had ruled the Carrington dynasty for generations. It featured direct quotes from Genevieve's cruel dismissal of Elena's worth, paired with Liam's passive agreement and cowardly silences. Social media erupted. Feminist groups, abuse survivors, and public figures alike condemned the revelation, trending the hashtag breeding vessel across platforms. Investors who had cautiously remained neutral now made swift public exits. Political figures distanced themselves. 2 luxury brands revoked ambassador partnerships with the Carrington name. But the most devastating blow wasn't from the press, it was personal. Liam's younger sister, Charlotte, who had long stayed out of family matters, publicly posted a letter online denouncing both Liam and Genevieve. "I stayed silent for too long," she wrote. "But Elena never deserved this. And our family must not continue under a legacy built on lies." It was the final crack in the foundation. Liam's last line of defense, his family, had walked away. And Elena hadn't even had to speak a single word. Back in her apartment, Elena sat near the fireplace, a soft blanket draped across her lap, the baby's first kicks growing stronger by the day. Nora arrived with groceries and a wide-eyed look of disbelief. "That recording. Elena, you dropped a bomb." But Elena simply smiled faintly and said, "It wasn't a bomb. It was truth. The kind they never saw coming because they believed their shadows would never catch up." She had never needed to scream, beg, or seek vengeance in rage. Her strength had been quiet, layered, and precise. Later that night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she thought of the girl she used to be, the one who questioned herself in mirrors, who tried to adjust to a world she didn't belong to. That girl no longer existed. And Liam? He was now a man watching his reflection dissolve, unable to recognize the empty vessel he had become. Elena pressed a hand to her stomach and whispered to the child growing inside her, "You will never know fear like I did. You will be raised by truth." She didn't know exactly what the future held. But for the first time, she knew what it didn't, and that was enough. It arrived without fanfare, just a cream-colored envelope tucked into Elena's mailbox, no return address, no markings beyond her name written in the familiar sharp tilt of Liam's handwriting. She stared at it for a long time, her fingers brushing over the crease, heart a drumbeat of unease. For days, she'd ignored the speculation swirling online, that Liam had been spotted in counseling, that he was rebuilding from ground zero, that he'd been seen exiting a church. Rumors. All noise. But this letter? It was real. Inside, on thick parchment paper, was a handwritten apology, if it could be called that. Elena, it began, I don't expect forgiveness, and I know I no longer deserve the right to even ask for it. But for what it's worth, I want you to know. I remember everything. And I was wrong. About you. About us. About power. The rest was filled with regret laced in a strangely unfamiliar humility. No begging, no excuses, just a hollow attempt at redemption. He confessed to the forged documents. To Marissa. To the offshore accounts. He admitted it all. But what stunned Elena most wasn't the admissions, it was the final line. If you choose to burn this letter, I understand. I deserve to disappear. Elena didn't cry. She didn't throw the letter or slam it into a drawer. Instead, she folded it back into its envelope and walked it to the fireplace. She stood there for a long time, staring into the low-burning embers, the words weighing heavy in her palm. This wasn't closure, it was aftermath. A soft echo of destruction long since set in motion. She thought of the girl she had been when she first married Liam, the girl who smiled at the idea of partnership, who believed in the fairy tale image of safety wrapped in silk and marble. And then she thought of everything she had endured, the cold nights, the public shame, the hidden cameras, the signatures that weren't hers, the fear she carried like a second skin. She looked down at her swollen belly, her baby nearly full-term now, and knew this letter didn't deserve her tears. It didn't deserve the space it occupied in her peace. She held the parchment above the fire until the flames reached and licked the edges. And as the ink curled and turned to ash, Elena exhaled deeply. Not in sadness, but in finality. Some stories didn't end with forgiveness. Some just ended. Outside, snow had begun to fall, coating the quiet neighborhood in a blanket of hush. Elena stepped onto her porch, her boots pressing softly into the white, her coat wrapped around her, the letter's ashes cooling behind her. She didn't check the news, didn't answer her phone. Nora had texted to say Liam was officially disqualified from holding executive positions for 10 years under federal sanctions. Tessa had shared that Liliana's tech startup had been funded in full by international investors moved by her survival. The world was still spinning. Justice had done its part. And Elena? She chose solitude that day, not as punishment, but as preservation. She made herself tea, lit a single candle, and sat in the armchair by the window where she had first mapped out her silent war. She touched her belly, felt a strong kick, and smiled. There were no cameras, no spotlights, no parades. Only warmth. The kind that isn't borrowed from power, but created by survival. For Liam, this was the chapter he never saw coming. For Elena, it wasn't revenge. It wasn't triumph. It was something greater. The unwavering peace of knowing she didn't just escape a nightmare, she walked through it, and built a life on the other side. The wedding was small by choice, not necessity. Nora and her fiancé, Julian, an investigative journalist she met during the early days of Elena's case, opted for a serene garden ceremony at a vineyard just outside the city. Elena, dressed in a pale lavender gown that gently hugged her 9-month belly, stood at Nora's side as maid of honor. The sky above was crisp and blue, birds singing in harmony with the string quartet. But beneath the soft petals and wine toasts, the atmosphere carried something deeper, an unspoken testament to survival. Each woman present had been through fire, Liliana, now standing with a soft smile just behind the groom's mother, Tessa, laughing with investors she once feared to face, and Elena, radiant not because of her beauty, but because she now lived untouched by fear. After the vows were exchanged and applause filled the air, Nora clutched Elena's hand with tears in her eyes. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Elena shook her head. You did it. I just reminded you who you were. The words weren't dramatic. They were true. Because in this circle of women, no one wore crowns, but all of them had built kingdoms from rubble. The next day, Liliana's memoir was announced publicly, Silk and Stone, the women they couldn't silence. The cover bore no faces, just an abstract image of broken glass reshaping into wings. Elena's name was not mentioned, at her request. She had contributed, edited, and endorsed, but she did not want to be a protagonist in another story. "It's your voice now," she told Liliana. "Use it well." The book instantly climbed bestseller lists. Media outlets called it a raw, necessary account of corporate abuse, betrayal, and the resilience of women who learned to weaponize truth. Bookstores filled with quotes from chapters detailing Liliana's downfall, Tessa's stolen designs, and Nora's early warnings. Behind the scenes, a percentage of the profits was quietly directed into a trust for abuse victims and silenced whistleblowers. Elena declined every television request, every podcast invitation. She spent her days walking along the lakeside, preparing for the arrival of her child, quietly cheering for her sisters from the wings. The spotlight had never been her ambition, freedom had. And now that she had it, she knew how rare and sacred it was. Watching others rise from the same ashes that once tried to consume her. That was enough. One evening, Marcus stopped by with a wrapped gift and soft eyes that held both admiration and regret. He had grown quieter since the trial ended, his rivalry with Liam now little more than a footnote to a chapter neither of them cared to revisit. "It's a sound machine," he said, placing the gift near the crib Elena had just assembled. "For the baby. White noise. Rain sounds. That kind of thing." She thanked him, her smile warm but distant. There was respect between them, deep, earned, but nothing romantic. And Marcus understood. "You're not building something new," he said, half to himself. "You're protecting what you finally made your own." Elena nodded. "Exactly." As he left, she stood at the doorway for a moment, watching the wind roll over the lake, her hands resting on her stomach. The world was still loud, still cruel. But within the walls she now called home, peace reigned. Her life was no longer curated for perception, it was lived fully, deliberately, quietly. She had loved. She had hurt. She had fought. And now, all that remained was this, a room filled with light, a heart that no longer trembled, and a future she had claimed, not as someone's wife, but as her own woman. The morning her daughter was born, the world outside was washed in gold. Elena had gone into labor just before dawn, alone but calm, her overnight bag already prepacked beside the front door. Nora had insisted she'd be there, but Elena had smiled and said, "If she comes early, it's because she knows I'm ready." And she was. At the birthing center, Elena's labor was long but undramatic. No one hovered. No one barked instructions. There were no expectations other than breath, presence, and strength. When her daughter finally arrived, full of life and lungs, Elena held her close to her chest and whispered, "You are everything I fought for." She named her Naomi Grace, after the woman who taught her how to stand in the strength she had to find on her own. The nurses remarked on how peaceful Elena looked. "She doesn't look like she just gave birth," one said. But Elena wasn't just giving birth to a child, she was giving birth to herself again. Not the version Liam tried to mold. Not the one that shrank in silence. This woman had walked through ruin and fire. And now, with Naomi cradled to her chest, she had emerged reborn. The weeks that followed were quiet, but not lonely. Nora visited often, bringing meals and filling the nursery with laughter. Tessa sent hand-woven blankets from her new textile line. Liliana, on her European book tour, wrote postcards from every city she visited, each signed with a promise, one day, Naomi will know her mother changed everything. Elena's apartment remained modest, still nestled by the lake, its garden growing fuller with each passing day. Some days, she sat on the porch, Naomi nestled in her arms, while birds sang from the branches above. She didn't need attention. She didn't crave vindication. The world had seen enough. Now, she simply wanted to live in truth. She taught Naomi to giggle at the wind, to reach for sunbeams, and to find comfort in her mother's heartbeat. Occasionally, letters still arrived addressed to Mrs. Carrington. Elena never opened them. They were reminders of a story she had ended. Naomi didn't need to know pain to understand strength. She would grow up surrounded by women who had chosen freedom over fear, who had rebuilt their lives with dignity and grace. Elena had not just escaped Liam, she had transcended him. One late afternoon, Elena opened her journal for the first time in nearly a year. Naomi was napping nearby, the sound machine humming with soft rain. She flipped to the first blank page and wrote without hesitation, "This is not a story about a man's fall. This is a story about a woman's rise. About how silence isn't the absence of strength, but the space where it takes root. About how sometimes you win by walking away, not as a victim, but as the architect of your own peace." She paused, then wrote two more words beneath it, "We survived." Outside, the sun began to set, spilling warm amber through the windows. Elena stood, kissed her daughter's forehead, and walked into the nursery, feeling nothing but lightness. No ghosts followed her. No chains clung to her ankles. She had no need for revenge, no lingering ache for closure. Everything she had endured had been transmuted into purpose. Her new beginning didn't require an audience. Just love. Just breath. Just Naomi. And for the first time in her life, Elena Dawson, no longer Carrington, was finally, gloriously, free. The end.